Good evening, everyone. So glad we all can be here, and so glad those of you that are listening online and going to study with us can be with us also. In October of 1972, pardon me, I worked up a sermon. It was, if the foundations can be destroyed, what will the righteous do? I've preached it numerous times throughout the years. Preached it here several years ago. Of course, change it a little bit every time I preach it, but it's basically the same sermon. It's one of my favorite sermons that I've ever worked up and preached. And so I decided to close out my preaching as a local preacher by going back to it and preaching it. I want to start by reading in Psalms 11, beginning with verse 1. In the Lord I put my trust. How say you to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For lo, the wicked bend their bow, they make ready their arrow upon the string, that they may privately shoot at the upright in heart. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? This is a psalm of David. But David wasn't the one that asked the question, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? It was the rabble-rousers that were trying to overthrow the righteous that asked this question. David said, I put my trust in the Lord. What do you say to my soul? Flee to your mountain, and so forth. And if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? It was a question of contempt. We probably have heard something similar to that sometime from those that don't believe in God during our lifetime. When it gets in this country to where people just basically don't believe in God, what are you righteous folks going to do? Who are you going to preach to? Question of contempt. So let's consider that question. And at first we might feel like that would be it, that there'd be nothing that the righteous could do if the foundations were destroyed. The foundations under consideration are not named. I believe that's for the very reason that the basic foundations of any God-approved society have always been the same from the beginning. There's the foundation of the family relationship. In this sermon, as I develop that point, I likely will simply refer to it as home. Now, I'm aware that every time the word home is used in the Bible, it talks about a place that people live. It isn't talking about the family specifically. But metanomically, or it can be the family relationship can be called home because the family is what's in the home. like the fruit of the vine can be called the cup, because the fruit of the vine is what's in the cup. So it's altogether properly referred to as the family relationship is home, if we understand we're using home metonomically. The home God established for companionship. He said it's not good for man to be alone. I'll make him a helper that's suitable for him. And we all know that he made woman from a rib of Adam and brought her to Adam. And Adam said, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." And God said, "Let a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife." And God also said, as is recorded in the New Testament in Matthew 19:6, "What God has joined together, let not man put asunder." The family relationship was established for companionship. Then another thing of any God-approved society is government. When government is as God would have it to be. And we'll learn as we study on that government is to protect the good and to punish the evil. This statement from Thomas Jefferson, I skip over now and we'll refer back to it when we get on the second point of government. So let's just go to the next one. Then the foundation of any God-approved society is church, or a relationship with God. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen talks about the church in the wilderness. God's people in the wilderness was his called out people, his church. And church has always been for man's benefit so he can be reconciled unto God. But let us think about these three things as we continue with our study. We've just noticed God's marriage law from the beginning. Wasn't too long before people started violating that. In Genesis 4:19, Lamech said to his wives, he had taken 2 wives, and he said to them, "I've killed a man," and so forth. But he had 2 wives. That's the point we have there. By the time we get to Genesis chapter 6, we find that man's life and the thoughts of his heart were so evil continually that God said he was going to destroy the earth, that man wasn't fit to live upon his green earth. But we get down to verse 6 and we find that Noah found favor in God's sight. In the New Testament, I believe it's 2 Peter 1:5, refers to Noah as being righteous, that preached to the people before the flood. Because of his righteousness, God told him to build the ark. We all know that story, so I'll not belabor it. He did build that ark. He and his family went in the ark, and they were saved, and the rest of the inhabitants of the earth that breathed air were destroyed. So we see when man does not respect God's marriage law, disaster follows. I know Genesis 6 doesn't mention marriage specifically, but it does say that sons of God took to them daughters of men and chose them wives, took wives of all that they chose. Man had come to disrespect God so that he didn't look for spiritual qualities. He just looked for outward qualities and beauty and what appealed to the lust of the flesh. The sons of God took daughters of men. They disrespected God's law, but God did not ignore that. As a result of it, he sent the flood, as we've just mentioned. And many people today in our society do not respect God's marriage law. Even some gospel preachers and some conservative gospel preachers, as relates to institutionalism even, have come up with various theories and views that try to circumvent the strictness of God's marriage law. But God's marriage law has never changed. I know Moses allowed them some concessions in regard to it. But in reference to that, in Matthew 19:9, Jesus said, "From the beginning it has not been so." So God's law holds fast as it was in the beginning. And Jesus states that law pretty plainly in Matthew 19:9. "Whosoever shall divorce his wife except for the cause of fornication, and marries another, commits adultery, and she who marries another commits adultery." We learn from that anyone that takes a wife and divorces her for any cause other than spiritual and physical adultery also commits adultery if that one marries again. That's God's law today. People disrespect it. Divorces are granted by the state or the states for any kind of reason. But God doesn't recognize that. Many people with a marriage license that permits them, in harmony with the state law, to live with a mate are living in adultery because they're not living in harmony with God's law. The home is a basic unit of society. But forces are at work everywhere to destroy the home or family as God would have it. Free love is advocated, communal living is defended. This is really not anything new. A number of years ago, I found out from history that sometime before 1917, Russia tried to do away with God's marriage law and no respect for it whatsoever, communal living and things like that. But in 1917, history said that they restored it, God's order of the family unit to keep the nation from self-destructing. This foundation is under attack. If the righteous destroy it, if sinners, the rabble-rousers destroy it, what can the righteous do? I have a few things here I want to read, and they're old, but it has not got any better since these things were written. More ERA philosophy, it says. Marriage has existed for the benefit of men and has been legally sanctioned method of control over women. The end of the institution of marriage is necessary for the liberation of women. There it's important for us to encourage women to leave their husbands and not live individually with men. Now we know marriage, is the institution that has failed us, and we must work to destroy it. With the destruction of the nuclear family must come a new way of looking at children. They must be seen as the responsibility of an entire society rather than individual parents. Document Declaration of Feminism. Another, we really do not know how to raise children. If we want to talk about equality of opportunity for children, the fact that children are reared in family means there's no equality. It's a dilemma. In order to raise children with equality, we must take them away from the family and communally raise them. Mary Jo Blaine, Associate Director of Wellesley College Center of Research for Women. A couple of more that I want to read here. James S. Buckley, who was a state representative of Virginia, said, "Let me tell you what the Department of Education is doing to your children, your grandchildren, and all ever beloved youngsters. Incredibly, it appears that the Department of Education's #1 objective is to sell sex education to every child in every classroom in America. Let me explain. Gino Leary was co-executive director of the National Gay Force Task Force. In simple words, she was a homosexual. And former President Carter appointed her to set guidelines for your family. Now, Gino Leary's guidelines have been taken up by the Department of Education, and just listen to what Gino Leary naturally program demands. #1, schools should set up lesbian study programs. 2, schools should provide books that portray the joy of women loving women. 3, lesbian clubs should be established in the schools." One more here, then I have another reading before it's over. Dr. Carlisle Zimmerman of Harvard University stated, and this was a number of years ago, "The family is rapidly approaching its third violent crisis. This crisis will be the third manifestation of mass disregard for the family in Western society. The first occurred in Greece, the second in Rome, and facing these crises, neither Rome or Greek civilization was able to survive." This was a number of years ago, over 30 years ago that was written, and he said it was fastly approaching that then, much closer to that now. One more here. In the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, in Gibbon's book, these are the reasons he stated for the fall of the Roman Empire: the undermining dignity and sanctity of the home, which is the basis for human society; higher and higher taxes; the spending of public money for free bread and circuses for the populace; the mad maze for pleasure, sports becoming every year more exciting, more brutal, and more immoral; the building of great armaments when the real enemy was within; the decay of individual responsibility; and lastly, the decay of religion, faith fading to mere form, losing touch with life, losing the power to guide people. That's shocking. If the foundations be destroyed, what shall the righteous do? you destroy this foundation, the home, family relationship, and no civilization can last very long. That's bad, but what's worse is the eternal consequences of it. Next, let us come to the government. The purpose of government is to protect the good and to punish the evil. I'm turning now to Romans chapter 13, with which I'm sure you're all very familiar. Begin reading with verse 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resists the power, resists the ordinance of God. And they that resist must receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works. That's when they are the kind of rulers they ought to be. But to evil. Wilt thou not then be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon them that do evil. So God ordained civil government so that in any society, the powers that be, functioning as they should, would protect the good and would punish the evil. It's sad, but in our society that has almost been reversed. I believe we hear more about the criminal not getting his rights than we do about the good getting their rights and protection from the criminal in our society today. It's just about been reversed. But the civil government was ordained to protect the good and punish the evil, and severely when it says that he, when acting as he should, bears not the sword in vain, could refer to nothing but capital punishment for some crimes. But that is the function of civil government. But our government, like the home, is also under severe attack. Men write for their rights, and criminals blame society for their downfall. Like I mentioned ago, courts are more concerned about the rights of the criminal instead of protecting the good. And here's where I want to go back to the green print now. We were in D.C. several years ago, and in the Jefferson Monument, these words were on the wall. I tremble for my country when I reflect that my God is just. His justice will not sleep forever. Think how far back that was when Jefferson thought it was that bad compared to today. Brethren, it's time that we tremble for our country when we reflect that God is just, and it is as true as it can be that his justice will not sleep forever. Our government is under attack. When we lived in Denton, Texas, there was a man that broke into a young married woman's house and tried to molest her there. She fought him and got out of the house in the yard, where he overcame her and did rape her. He was found and identified and brought to court. and I'm going to use a word that I don't use too often, but I don't know any other word that describes what I want to say. A stupid jury of men and women turned him loose and did not exact any punishment. About 6 months later, he went up to Sanger, Texas, 12 miles up north of Denton, and did the same thing again. And the last I read of him, he was caught and incarcerated again, but I never was able to learn out what the outcome was then. Also, while we were in Denton, there was something out at Lake Dallas, which is right at Louisville's city limits, that a bunch of rabble-rousers had a big convention, if you could call it that, and according to the reports, nudity, drug taking, open fornication, and things like that were taking place out there, just in the public that was there. The sheriff of that county tried to do something about it, and I want to use this word again, the stupid city council and those that hired him told him to leave them alone. They weren't damaging anyone, and when he wouldn't leave them alone, they fired him. A lot of people that drove from Denton to Dallas, and many people worked in Denton and drove to Dallas. There was a lot of complaints about it. But the two basic newspapers, Dallas Morning News and Fort Worth Star-Telegram, said something like this, just summing it up. If you don't like to see it, then don't look when you go by. Don't tell me that our government is not under attack. There was a fellow named Stout in Denton that had a little paper that came out twice a week. And he leveled his guns at those to whom the guns should have been leveled. But the newspapers tried to say, hands off, let them do what they want to do. Don't tell me that our government's not under attack. Then let us come to the third point. The church exists for reconciliation to God. I'm turning now to Ephesians chapter 2 and begin with verse 14. And it doesn't read right in Philippians 2. Talking about Jesus Christ, verse 13. For he is our peace, who has made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in the ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace, and that he might reconcile both, that's Jew and Gentile, unto God in one body, by the cross having slain the enmity thereby. So the church exists to bring men, whether Jews or Gentiles, under reconciliation with God, unto God. But the church is also under attack. Of course, the humanists and the atheists, and if I understand it, all humanists are atheists, but all atheists aren't humanists. They're under attack. The church is under attack by them. The church that Christ purchased with his own blood, and as God would have it, is under attacked by the Pope, by the council, the convention, the assembly, or whatever it may be that is the head of a denominational group, and by all the denominations, they would say not guilty to that. And I'm sure many of them think they're not guilty, but nevertheless, we who know the truth of God about the church know that they are teaching for doctrines the commandments of man, and Jesus said it made their service vain, Matthew 15:9. I would like to back up to Ephesians 2 and verse 16 to finish making this point, that he might reconcile both Jew and Gentile unto God. That's reconciliation to God, not to anyone else. By the cross, and cross here is put for the whole remedial process. And that reconciliation cannot be any other way. In one body. I would look foolish to claim that what spiritually man needs is reconciliation to some person other than God. I would look foolish to claim that reconciliation to God could be some way other than by the cross of Jesus, be denying the blood as the saving factor of the gospel. Thus, it looks to me like it's just as foolish to claim that reconciliation can be to God in more than the one body of which Christ is the head. And we know that the head relates the message to the members for the action. And Jesus has very plainly related to the members the actions that he wants them to perform. And the denominations pay no attention to that. They do what they want to do instead of, and even like in the Standard Manual of the Baptist Church, it reads that in apostolic days, when one believed and was baptized, that constituted him a full member of the church, but now it's different. A candidate must come before the church and be voted on before he can be received into the Southern Baptist congregation. In that same manual, we read that in apostolic days they observed the supper on the first day of every week, but now it's different with them. They're directing their own steps or letting others direct them, and that just will not save. The church is under attack by these false doctrines. That's bad, but brethren, what concerns me more is the church is under attack by many of its members. And I'm not talking about those way off in liberalism. I'm talking about those who are basically conservative in relation to those issues. I guess I could sum what I'm talking about up in one word: indifference. Do we study as much as we should? Do we teach others like we should? Are we praying like we should? Too many have become too indifferent, and the church is under attack by too many in that way. So the foundations are under attack. Young people have been told that if they are religious, it will stymie them, that they can't enjoy a full life. It'll repress them. Ridicule all religion and say there's really no standard of right and wrong. But let me tell you, there is a standard of right or wrong, and there are two factors in that make there a standard of right or wrong, right and wrong. Number one, God is. And number two, God has spoken. And that makes a standard of right or wrong. To find what is wrong and what's wrong, go to the book. Having developed this and shown that these three foundations of our society are under attack, I want to turn back to Psalms 11 to bring the lesson to a conclusion. Verse 3 is a very disturbing question. If the foundations be destroyed, what are you righteous folks going to do? Let's not throw up our hands in desperation, but let us recognize there is something we can do. And we find out what those things are. Two general things mentioned, and a third one we learn by necessary inference from this text. In verse 1, David said, "In the Lord I put my trust." So we can keep on trusting. Let us just read on again. Not again, but read on. The Lord's in his holy temple. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. The Lord tries the righteous, but the wicked and him that loves violence his soul hates. Upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire and brimstone, horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. For the righteous Lord loves righteousness. His countenance does behold the upright. So David's answer to those rabble rousers, if these foundations are destroyed, what can you do? Infers that we don't believe you can do anything. It'll be your end. David says, not so. I'll keep on trusting. And if our foundations are destroyed, if the rabble rousers do succeed, and if this old world keeps getting more wicked, they will succeed one of these days. I don't think there's any doubt about that. What can the righteous do? As long as the earth lasts, the righteous can keep on trusting in God. And to trust God means we let him direct our lives. The righteous can do that. Then the righteous can keep on being righteous. He tries the righteous, and the righteous Lord loves the righteous. His countenance does behold the upright. So in answer to that question, not only can the righteous keep on being righteous, we can keep on trusting, we can keep on being righteous. The third thing I mentioned is not specifically stated here, but it is necessarily inferred. You take a righteous people that keep on trusting in God, and what's going to be the result? They're going to keep on teaching the Word. That necessarily follows. Don't keep on living and teaching the Word. They're not trusting and they're not righteous. So if the rebel rousers should destroy the foundations, the righteous can keep on trusting, being righteous, and preaching the Word to others. Then I'd like to make a concluding remark here. Brethren, the gospel has not lost its power. Too many of us have lost our fire. I've heard members of the church say, well, it just doesn't seem to do any good to try to teach others. You can't find anybody out there that will listen, and it's true that most won't listen. But you try teaching enough people, some will listen. They didn't listen to Jesus, and they didn't listen to Paul, but they kept on teaching. The gospel hasn't lost its fire. It still will save such as it saved, as mentioned in 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 11, the adulterers, fornicators, homosexuals. He says, and such were some of you, but you are washed, you're sanctified, you're justified by the blood of Christ. You'll not likely to find anybody in the world more depraved than some of those at Corinth were that he's talking about here. But the gospel reached some of them, and it'll still reach some people today if we will just keep on teaching the word and trying to convert and to save others. Before the invitation song, I want to make a final comment. Brethren, if heaven is worth anything, it's worth everything. So live like we really believe that. We're going to sing, and if we can help you in any way to be right with God, please come.